I remember Dad just being so blown away, and I can remember him saying, "Spider-Man, what? How are they getting away with this? What?" He couldn't believe that Spidey was in this game. But then he morphs into none other than Batman. This is where my dad is just like losing it. He can't make sense out of how they got away with this. First, a word from this video's sponsor, Magic Spoon. Growing up, cereal wasn't just breakfast, it was the event. Saturday mornings, cartoons on the tube, a big colorful bowl in my lap.
Come on, do it. Oh, whoa.
It was pure magic. And let's be real, that stuff we ate back then, full of sugar. Not exactly the fuel we need now. That's why I've been loving Magic Spoon. They've taken that same nostalgic flavor and fun and powered it up for grown-ups like me. Their new granola has 13 grams of protein and 0 added sugar. And these crispy treats? 11 to 12 grams of protein, only 1 gram of sugar, and no sticky mess. It's the perfect snack for editing sessions, filming days, or chasing my kids around. Use my code MyRetroLife or head to magicspoon.com/MyRetroLife and grab $5 off your next order. There's even a 100% happiness guarantee. You've got nothing to lose, except that sugar crash. There's my dad holding up Revenge of Shinobi and Shadow Dancer, Secret of Shinobi on our Sega Genesis.
This is Revenge of Shinobi, then there's Shadow Dancer, Secret of Shinobi, right? Secret of Shinobi, right?
We were filming the Genesis Power Team tape that we sent over to my cousins in New York to try to convince them to buy a Sega Genesis.
Hope you enjoy it. You're watching Genesis, the Power Edge.
That summer of 1991, my Nintendo Entertainment System was stolen when my house was burglarized. The burglars stole my favorite thing in the world, my Nintendo. That's when Dad and I traded up for a Sega Genesis. And so we were in the market for all the latest and greatest Sega Genesis games.
Genesis brings you the dazzling powers of the mystic warriors, the ninja, in Revenge of Shinobi. Sega Genesis brings the arcade experience home.
Every new game we were picking up was blowing our minds and showing us what 16-bit graphics and gameplay were really all about.
And also, we're going to preview one of the best games ever made for the arcades, Alien Storm. You won't believe what you see in this game. I mean, this blows Nintendo out of the water.
It was around this time that Dad decided, you know what? We are not looking backwards. We're not going back. So he sold all of our NES games. Our entire collection of NES games were sold for money that we could then use to put towards a library of Sega Genesis games.
And we're also going to preview Strider. Strider, once available on NES, Nintendo.
This was such an incredible time, guys, because I just remember every week when my dad had his day off from work, we would go shopping and we were picking up brand new Sega Genesis games left and right. The likes of Castle of Illusion, Dick Tracy, E-SWAT. And then one day, we went to Toys R Us.
The Sega Genesis game system at the world's biggest video game store.
I remember going down the Sega Genesis aisle with Dad and staring at that wall of Sega Genesis games. And we were like kids in a candy store. We had this money that we were going to use until it was all gone that was dedicated specifically for Sega Genesis games. And on this particular day, we were looking at that wall of Genesis games, you know, with the old Toys R Us price slips that you'd have to pull out of the sleeve, and that's how you bought the game. You would take that to the cashier. I remember looking at that wall, and Dad pointed out a game that I'd never seen before, but the cover art was so stark. It was so vivid. The image of that ninja, Joe Musashi, with this sort of demon boss behind him. the vivid eyes. I'll never forget just the way that cover art looked. It jumped out at you. It commanded your attention. And it just looked so cool and so mature. That's what the Sega Genesis was proving to be. A mature video game system for those who were leveling up from an NES. Between games like Golden Axe and Streets of Rage, Revenge of Shinobi, man, these games just look so amazing with that killer box art. And so Dad points to the game and he tells me, I think we should get this one. Let's get this one. And I remember us looking at it and him explaining to me that he felt like this was going to be a good one. Back before the internet, this was all we had to go on. Still images in a video game magazine, or images on the back of the box art, or just the cover art alone for a game. That's what sold you on the game most of the time. And so this was one of those games where Dad just had a really good feeling. We picked up Revenge of Shinobi that day, and instantly my Sega Genesis collection leveled up. I can remember playing this game for the first time with Dad. The title screen alone just ushered in an entirely new era of video games. That lightning bolt, when it flashes and you see the silhouette of Joe Musashi standing there greeting you for that title screen, it was just, we had never seen anything like it. No NES game did anything like this or came anywhere close. This was like having the arcade at home, and so, oh, what a showpiece this game was. And right from the jump, it had our attention. And then the game begins. And immediately you're hit with that iconic Yuzo Koshiro music. I had never heard video game music that was so layered. And I can remember Dad specifically making note of the title screen, seeing that it said Yuzo Koshiro was the composer of the music. Like, you didn't see stuff like that back in the day. It made Dad take notice because I remember him making comments about the Sega Genesis and its stereo sound, how that was a big deal. The NES was mono. It was games like this that made Dad notice the sound output and the sound quality of the Sega Genesis. I can remember Dad actually looking at the Sega Genesis and showing me, look, Tyler, you can turn the volume up and down on the unit itself. How crazy that was and how it emphasized the importance of sound quality.
In three-dimensional sound and stereo color, that three-dimensional sound.
It even had a headphone jack coming right out of the system. And so Dad, being an audiophile and somebody who loved music, the Sega Genesis, it's clear to see, it's understandable why Dad fell in love with this video game console. And Revenge of Shinobi was one of the games that made him fall in love.
One of the best games ever made.
I can remember us making our way through the first couple of stages of that game, just eating it up with a spoon and loving everything about it. The graphics, the attention to detail, the animations of all the different enemies, and the double jump. Mastering the double jump and throwing that barrage of shurikens. There was an art to mastering the controls of this game, and learning the double jump was so essential for you to even make it past the second level. Because right there in stage 2, you need to learn how to jump on those logs coming off of that waterfall, and you have to jump with precision. And the double jump is the only way you're going to get through this game. I can remember us being stuck on that second level for the longest time because we hadn't mastered the double jump. Every new level brought with it this entirely new vibe. I remember getting to that seedy back alley level with the nuns walking down the street and they turn into ninja girls. I remember thinking, what is a nun doing in a game? And wait, they're evil? Evil nuns? There was so much personality in these enemies. And that's when things started to get a little sketchy with Revenge of Shinobi.
Experience the ninja magic of Revenge of Shinobi for the Genesis system.
There's a stage early on in the game where you encounter a flamethrower-wielding soldier. And he looks just like John Rambo. I kid you not, guys, when we first encountered this, I remember my dad making a comment and saying, "Hey, look at that, he looks just like Rambo." And it would only get crazier from there. As we made our way through the game, more and more enemies started resembling copyrighted characters from movies. There's a boss that looks just like Arnold Schwarzenegger from Terminator. I can remember Dad pointing this out. Look, it's Arnold! Arnold is the boss! And you're fighting him, and he's throwing cars at you. Really kind of reminded me of Two Crude Dudes, actually. We used to play that game in the arcade. And as you fight that boss, he starts turning into the Incredible Hulk before he sheds his skin and reveals a Terminator exoskeleton. I mean, it was so obvious at this point that SEGA was ripping off these movies. Rambo, Terminator, you had Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger in this awesome ninja action game. You know, you could get away with a lot of this stuff back in the day. It was sort of the Wild West of gaming back in the 80s and 90s. I can remember specifically the Castlevania games. Konami did not hide who they were inspired by and ripping off in the Castlevania series with their monsters and enemies. But that was a little different because those were like folklore monsters, you know? Those were monsters that were definitely within public domain, you know, Frankenstein, Dracula. But here we had SEGA, and they were really pushing the limits of what they could get away with in terms of copyright law. John Rambo and the Terminator were very clearly in this game. They weren't hiding it. And while we were shocked by all of this and delighted, you know, we love the fact that these enemies were in the game, those two enemies would not compare to what we were going to discover. So we had owned the game for a while, and it took us several weeks, if not months, to get further into the game. You know, back in these days, no password. You had to just master the game to get through it and see the next level and push forward. One day, I remember Dad and I were playing the game, and we finally got to the end of stage 6. And I remember to this day the shock and bewilderment on my dad's face when Spider-Man drops from the ceiling and you start fighting Spider-Man. This was just like insane to us. And I remember Dad just being so blown away and so excited that Spider-Man was in this game. And I can remember him saying, "Spider-Man, what? How are they getting away with this? What?" And so we're fighting Spider-Man. We're like, Spider-Man is the bad guy, and we're fighting him. We're throwing ninja stars at him and doing our best to take Spider-Man out because he's trying to take you out. And he's throwing those webs at you, and you're dodging them. And oh my gosh, it was crazy. But that wasn't where it stopped. Once you get to a certain point, you defeat Spider-Man, but then he morphs into none other than Batman. This is where my dad is just like losing it at this point, because it's like the coolest boss fight he'd ever seen in a video game up until that point. And he can't make sense out of how they got away with this. It was so random, guys. You know, you're playing through this game, and sure, you encountered Rambo and a Terminator-looking boss and stuff like that, but then you fight Spider-Man and Batman, and it just made no sense whatsoever. It injected so much personality into this game, and it's what made us fall in love with this game. You see, guys, this actually meant more to Dad than just some sort of cameo. My grandfather, Mike Esposito, was a famous comic book artist in the Silver Age of comics, and he drew Spider-Man.
Oh my God.
Spider-Man was like a family friend or relative to my dad growing up because he was in the house all the time. My grandfather was an inker for Marvel, and he drew Spider-Man daily. This was the family's bread and butter. And Spider-Man was now in our Sega Genesis game. It was a shock. We continued through the game, and it didn't stop there, guys. The copyright infringement was just on full display. There's another boss later on, and it's Godzilla. It's Godzilla, and at this point, I think my dad was just like, who are we going to fight next? Michael Jackson? That would have made sense because Sega made a Michael Jackson game. Revenge of Shinobi would go down as one of our favorite Sega Genesis games.
One of the best games ever made.
When we got a Sega CD, Christmas of 1992, it came packed with Soul Feast and a compilation disc of 4 Sega Genesis games. It was called Sega Classics 4-in-1, and on that collection was Revenge of Shinobi, along with Streets of Rage, Golden Axe, and Columns. This is where it gets a little crazier, and this is where my dad really started wondering, what is going on here? We played through Revenge of Shinobi one day, and we got all the way to that section where you fight Spider-Man and Batman. And after you defeat Spider-Man, he's supposed to morph into Batman, right? Wrong. Instead, he leaves the screen and in flies this like devil man looking character. He looks like a gargoyle or something. It's not Batman. Sega must have gotten into some sort of legal troubles, and Batman could no longer be in the game. Or, and more realistically, Sega was trying to avoid a lawsuit with DC Comics, and they got rid of Batman. Interestingly enough, around this time, Sega had gotten permission and actually gotten the rights to make Spider-Man games. They had the license. You had the Spider-Man game in the arcade, which was a great beat-em-up, and you had Spider-Man on the Sega Genesis. You will notice that Spider-Man actually looks a little bit more like Spider-Man in this version. And some other versions of the game, like the Greatest Hits version that came out, or the Sega 6-pack compilation version. And it actually says on the title screen this time, Spider-Man, copyright Marvel. I remember Dad having this conversation with me and really teaching me about copyright law and explaining to me, oh, they must have ran into some sort of issue. There was something special about seeing Spider-Man and Batman on the screen and fighting the two of them. Having Batman be replaced by this kind of generic gargoyle devil-looking character, it just didn't even make sense anymore. We now had what felt like an inferior version of Revenge of Shinobi, because having those sort of boss characters like Batman in the game, it's sort of what gave the game its character and personality. We also noticed that this new version of the game, they took out the resemblance of Rambo. He's now a bald-headed guy, and really, he doesn't resemble Rambo anymore. Future versions of the game would go on to make more changes. A later revision actually removed Godzilla from the game, instead replacing him with like a skeleton dinosaur that's like inside out. You can see his organs. By the time the game was re-released on the Nintendo Wii on the Virtual Console, they removed Spider-Man, and instead it's like a pink Spider-Man. Like he's wearing some sort of pink leotard or something. That boss fight, by the time you play the Wii version on the Virtual Console, it's completely neutered. It's completely something different. Not the same. I feel like this was the beginning for me, the first example of a game company changing their original game and changing it for the worse. You know, making changes or revisions that end up hurting the game and not helping it. And we would only go on to see that sort of thing more and more as time went on. So many games get reissued, and you expect to have the same experience that you did when you were younger, when you first played it. You want it to be just as magical and unchanged. You want to feel like you're a kid again. But then you get to a certain area or section of this re-released game and you realize, wait a second, this is different. I remember when Wave Race came out on the Virtual Console and all of the Kawasaki jet ski branding was completely removed from the game. It instead got replaced with Nintendo Wii signage. And it took me out of that sort of time travel because it reminded me of what year I was in. And the one that hurt the most was probably another Sega game, Crazy Taxi. When that game got re-released down the line, they didn't have the rights to the Offspring music. That was basically the most iconic thing about Crazy Taxi was that Offspring music. I mean, that was the music that made me fall in love with the band. I became a huge Offspring fan and huge fan of that game because of their music. And to remove the music is like removing the soul of the game. I feel like that's what happened with Revenge of Shinobi. I feel like the more changes they made and the more they had to worry about getting sued, the more the game lost its soul. I kind of miss those days where video game companies could take chances and get away with stuff like this, copyright infringement. And it really was just a window into the minds of these developers. These guys making these games at Sega, they just loved pop culture just like we did. They loved movies, and they loved injecting those movies and those influences into their games. You see it throughout all of those early Sega games. So many of these games by Japanese developers were influenced by American pop culture. And Revenge of Shinobi was a case where they didn't even care how much they were going to be influenced. They were just going to put the characters right into the game. It was so much fun looking back at this game and remembering the time Dad and I first discovered these copyrighted characters. Sega's indiscretion, how they could care less about blatantly putting these copyrighted characters into their game. And it just made the game better. I want to know, guys, which version of Revenge of Shinobi did you first play? Was it the original version that had all of these copyrighted characters in it? Or maybe you first played the version with the pink Spider-Man on the Wii? Let me know in the comments below. And if this is your first time to the channel, do consider subscribing. I love talking about my game crazy family and all the amazing adventures we had with video games, so many of which were caught on tape by Dad. If you are enjoying the content here on My Retro Life, do consider supporting my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button right here on the screen. Big shout out and thank you to everyone who helps make this channel happen. That's it, guys. Catch you next time.